I'm going to be presenting on the project approval guidelines and particularly the simplified processes that we've just introduced for minor projects. So in general, they're projects under 10 million. So if you're working with myself and Oliver and our team on active travel projects, it's probably the majority of those fall into that. What I would say is, first of all, happy Bike Week. It's a bit unfortunate we don't have a cycling presentation maybe for this week, but we have lots of them on as part of the active travel series, both that have already been done, and you can view all of those as videos. Engineers Ireland are kindly hosting them all as videos on that website down there. And Bike Week has lots of Bike Week events all around the country, so also get onto the NTA and have a look at those. And we do have some great cycling presentations coming up as well, in particular things like urban design and how they might help push through some cycling projects, things like that. So this one is a bit more on the process side, but should that, if you'll excuse me, having a lame pun, that does grease the wheels of all of our projects. So yeah, the project approval guidelines, why do we have them? It's all about clarity and transparency. When anything to do with money, these are really important. So it's really important for local authorities, and I assume we're kind of talking to most of the audience might be our local authority engineers or planners who we're working with, and our guidelines are there to help you comply with this public spending code, and that it gives us clear, consistent and transparent approach to the management of all of our projects. So they actually apply across the board, from metro to all our ITC projects right down to footpaths and cycle tracks. So it gives us consistent and transparent approach, and obviously there's kind of proportionality in there, and I'll get to that later. And it really helps the department give us exchequer funding, public money, because we can be trusted with it. We have processes, and then we can give it to you. So then, yeah, why we're doing project approval guidelines: consistency, transparency, clarity. It's all about trust, really. And there's a lot of money, an increasing amount of money, so we're all protected, I suppose, by procedure. The public spending code is the primary source of all of our procedure, really, around funding. And it says the sponsoring agency, which in most cases will be the local authority, has the primary responsibility for evaluating, planning and managing the projects. We have to do that, though, within the parameters of this public spending code. The approving authority, which is the NTA, has the ultimate responsibility for the project. I didn't know that till I read that in the public spending code when I putting this slide together. So that's lovely. So, and the sponsoring agency must obtain the necessary approvals from the approving authority at each point in the process. So basically, we're not putting in a process for the crack, like it's required, and it's required from the highest level on the public spending code. And I know lots of you would much prefer, like, this is every engineer in every local authority. Public and the engineering designs and consultants and contractors, and you really don't need us, I'm sure, on the other end asking for deliverables and approving through processes. And that's this is how the conversations go, and we say, no, show me the correct deliverables and staged approvals, and then we all calm down and get on with it. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a block grant from the NTA. Fortunately or unfortunately, it would make our lives a lot easier, but I actually think in the end it does protect both the outcomes in terms of good design, and protects it's just required by the public spending code. So the project approval guidelines, and I'll be calling them PAGs from now on, in the presentation, they have 3 project bands: 1, 2 and 3. 0 to $500,000, the small fry; $500,000 to 10 million, which is a fairly big band, and then over 10 million, the big guys. So the Eoin will be dealing with mostly those projects. Not in this presentation. I'll be focusing on more on active travel projects, but obviously the big transport projects, Metro, Dart Plus, Bus Connects, they're all in that range and above. And in fairness, in our program, we do have quite a lot of projects that are over 10 million. Okay. Within the PAGs, there is a requirement to go through different gateways, 7 in fact. Yeah. So That's it, from scope and purpose through concept development, option selection, through to preliminary design, statutory processes. Yeah, my sharing, is my cursor on the right screen now? Yeah, statutory processes, detailed design, construction and implementation, close out and review. And there's a few gateways after that, particularly for the big projects. Most of you that have developed capital projects you're going through those phases anyway, really. And whether it's formal or not, when you're working with the NTA, we would be agreeing the design and the project as we go through those phases. So it's just putting a bit of formality on it. There's key terms within the PAGs, gateways and hold points. And the purpose of a gateway is, yeah, you've achieved, you've given us all the deliverables, you've met the requirements, you can proceed to the next phase. And going back there was gateways at the end of each phase. And we're looking at maybe automating that in future as an IT project, how to seek approval. There's also hold points, which is kind of, we just talk, we check in, is everything going okay? So it kind of provides an interim review of the deliverables. Like for example, before you go before you go out to non-statutory consultation, have we agreed that design, or have we agreed what we aren't going to agree about the design, that kind of thing. Yeah, and the whole points are there to minimize the risk of projects proceeding too far without agreement, because within particularly phase 2 and phase 3, and a lot of our projects would be years in there. They're the hard areas where you're trying to win over who you need to win over, do the assessments you need to do on the environmental and engineering feasibility, working with local communities and councillors and things like that. So I often say it's easy street once you get through stage 4. Yeah, so a lot of our projects could be years in there, and we don't want you going down cul-de-sacs where yeah, and having work that wasn't required. Okay, this is the big table. As Eoin says, this is this is the PAGs this is what the PAGs mean to him. And he asks, when people are asking what's project approval guidelines, he'll direct them to this table. And then if you want more detail on any of these, it's back into the actual guide long. The seven stages and gateways, and across here are the key deliverables. And I'm sure that does look quite daunting. There are in fact 34 deliverables there, and there is a lot of in the text of the document. There is good flexibility in there, and you could combine those, and maybe not all are required, but we did understand people coming new to the process and new to NTA funded projects, that looks quite daunting. And that is band 2, that's 500,000 to 10 million. There's more for band 3, and there's a bit less for band 1. So what we did was we worked to do a simplified process, basically, and that's allowed for in the guidelines. It was always there that phases and gateways could be combined or simplified due to project size and complexity. So we formalized that in simplified PAGs. They were circulated in July to the Director of Services. I hope they've come down to all of you. If not, you now know they are there. They do reduce the number of gateways and deliverables, and they are for band 1 and 2 projects, i.e. projects under 10 million, unless the NTA decides due to complexity we might need to apply the full PAGs. For band 3 projects, anything over 10 million, it's the full PAGs. So what do? They combine gateways. This is probably a bit fuzzy for you guys, I'm sorry. So you can see for band 1 projects, we just start with the application. We're going to combine all the gateways, option selection, preliminary design, statutory processes, and detailed design and procurement into one formal approval point, with a whole point that we have agreed the design before you go and tender it, and then the construction and gateway for all of the band 2 projects, all the projects under 10 million. Construction and closeout and review are going to be combined into one gateway. So band 2, we've kind of split band 2 because we did think from 500,000 to 10 million was quite a big range. We're dealing with a lot of you on smaller projects, footpaths, crossings, things like that. And then the 10 million would be certain, big junctions with kilometrage of pedestrian cycle link, some bus infrastructure, that sort of stuff. So we split band 2, And under 5 million, we've combined Gateway 2 and 3 with some whole points that we do agree the option selection report by email, and we agree the preliminary design by email. And then, yeah, we've combined the statutory processes and detailed design as one approval point. And as I said, construction and closeout is one approval point. So, and then as we get, obviously, as we go up in spends, things get a bit more onerous, and we have a few more approval points. Basically, we want to approve the option selection formally and then approve the preliminary design formally. So what does that look like? Well, these are the reduced deliverables. So this is kind of our new table from 34 to 9. So the key deliverable at Gateway 1 is the grant application form. At Gateway 2, it's the option selection report. At Gateway 3, it's preliminary design. And we want to agree the design before you go public, and that there's no difference in the public mind, in political minds, whether this consultation is statutory or non-statutory. There really isn't. So the NTA have to be yeah, we have to be on board. We have to know what's going out. We'll be getting the questions. We do have, as you've seen, we do have the ultimate responsibility, and more our savvy, increasingly savvy public know that we do. They actually have been quoted back to PAGs in FOIs and in requests, just public requests. So everybody knows that we are to approve projects through their life cycle. So yeah, we don't want any surprises. It might be that we agree to disagree, but at least we've agreed before going to public consultation. So really, it's statutory or non-statutory. We need to see any designs before they go public, and in this day and age, that really is even showing them on the screen to anyone. I mean, it's just too easy to take screenshots, and yeah, and then you're on the back foot if you have it. If people are up in arms already and you haven't got your ducks in a row in terms of public consultation, particularly if you haven't shown the NTA. And an updated appraisal, including cost estimate. So Eoin will be talking about this later, but really appraisal and option selection are almost one and the same. It's the appraisal is an option selection developed through the process. So you add in, as you're developing your project, you'll be adding in costs and adding in more detail. But the option selection, yes, so option selection morphs into appraisal. Gateway 4, we want to see the planning report, especially any changes in council chambers. Certain things can be put in or taken out that may impact on the validity of the scheme from the NTA's point of view. And Gateway 5, we want to see the detailed design and tender documents, the tender report, and the updated appraisal, including the total project cost. And we'd want to see the detailed design before it goes to tender. So that'd be a whole point, as you saw in the previous table. And then we want the final project report when you've gone and built it, because none of us are very good at this, but it's increasingly important to not just to have recorded what did happen and what the outcomes were, like how many kilometers were built or how many junctions were built, and also what the traffic and volumes and user volumes in terms of pedestrians and cyclists were before and after. And for some of our bigger schemes, we have user satisfaction surveys that we do, and all of this is really important, not just for the project that you're closing out, but for the next project that you're doing, because the more you can build up trust with your council, with your public, that what you are doing is beneficial, the easier the whole thing gets. So for an example, a band 1 project, say local authorities come to us, they want to build a footpath up to a school. There's been no footpath there before. The cost is 400,000 euros, including lighting. That's a small, we're not going to be asking for a whole lot there. We do want a grant application form. That's just a given. We can't do anything without that. We do want an option selection report actually in this, and this can be a paragraph up to a page, but we just wanted you to articulate the problem and the options that you had to solve it and where you arrived at. Now, a footpath to school, it's a bit of a no-brainer. There's not much else you could do, perhaps. But in some cases, say when we have gone back, people have asked to widen bridges when in fact they could maybe narrow the carriageway for the length of the bridge, that kind of thing. So We do want to kind of have an option selection report. I have a bit more on that later. We want to see the design again. That might just be a line on the road for a footpath. You know, it doesn't have to be. We just want to know where it's going from where to where, and the cost estimate. And we'll say, yeah, great, go for it. And yeah, in this kind of thing, final project report, it'll be like, yeah, we built 400 meters of a footpath, and these are all the photos of the people using it. Like, and that actually is really important to capture. And that, you know, that was done in that year. And again, it builds trust, it builds a bit of momentum for your whole program. So another example of a simplified process, say around the 4 million mark. So say it's you say it's about 2 kilometers of a cycle track in an urban area. We are looking for a grant application form. We are looking for an option selection report. It doesn't have to be huge, you know, it can be 10 to 20 pages, but we want to know that you've articulated what the issue was and the different options. They might be different route options or alignment options or design options. A lot of this process you go through in your head, but it's really recording that. We want to see the preliminary design before it goes to any public consultation. And we want to get the appraisal, which after you got your preliminary design, it's really just a very simple update of the option selection because you've got a more robust cost estimate. Yeah, we want to see a planning outcome report. If there's any changes, the whole point there is the detailed design and tender documents. We do need to see those before we approve to go to tender. And then yeah, get the tender report and the updated appraisal, and we sign off that you can go to construction. In terms of cost estimates, Oliver has done a wonderful job on the cost management guidelines, which a lot of you are using now, and there will be an upcoming webinar about that. And there's lots of there's a few, I'm saying, there's lots of handy templates of which you only need a few, and it's already resulted in much better estimates. We've been, for many years, people were totally underestimating how much this would all cost. Any project would cost, and that wasn't good for them, because nobody wants to launch a project that was the estimate was 2 million and it comes back as 6. Good on the council's part. So yeah, this includes VAT, contingency, risk, design fees, all these things that were sometimes left out of estimates. I'm going to give you a ballpark because we know, we're about 2.5 million a kilometre of cycle track in built up areas. In certain areas and city centre environments where there's a lot of utilities under the ground, a lot of complexities, a lot of traffic management, that can go 5 million a kilometre, that can go 10, 20 million a kilometre, it can, yeah. So that's just really ballpark in pretty simple suburban sort of area. And greenfield isn't that much cheaper. It can be 1.5 to 2 million. So if your estimates are not around there, probably start asking questions there and above, unfortunately. And yeah, no surprises. I'm going to cite the National Children's Hospital. Like nobody wants to be out in public saying this was the estimate and it to come in far and above that. So again, cost management guidelines, they're there to protect you. Do use them. They're very useful. The consultancies know them well now, and we're getting consistent cost estimates, which is great. Options reports, they're really key. They're basically, look, the public spending codes, the Department of Transport Common Appraisal Framework, you might have heard of CAF, and the NTA, we all require options. Don't skip them. Basically, it's a key part of any decision-making model. And you do it anyway. Often in the case, as I said, in this case, the smaller projects, it's just about recording a mental or automatic process. And it doesn't have to be long, but the more you've thought about the options, then maybe the next time, with human nature, we just generally jump to the solution sometimes. But then if you're kind of made to generate options, and you might be a bit annoyed about this, like it's so obvious, this is what we have to do. If you're made to generate options, that actually helps. It helps your problem solving capacities. And the next time when it's maybe not as obvious, it's easier. Yeah, so and the options report becomes the appraisal. It's just updated with more detail. All right, this is an example of an options report. Yeah, an option. This one's saying for small projects, we're just looking for Well, what were the alternatives and why were they not deemed suitable? Was there other routes? Was there alignments? Was there alternative designs? Was there management options? And CAF is big on this, like don't jump straight to the infrastructural options. Maybe there's management options. Maybe you can install a short one-way or shuttle system or something like that and actually get the road space that way. This is an example in Clane and Kildare where, you know, they could have come to us to widen. There was no footpaths. They could have come to us to widen the bridge, but what they did is install a shuttle system, stop go yield on the bridge, and it works really well. And this would be for an options report for a bigger scheme, 10 to 20 pages. Do outline the need for the scheme, the project objectives, and try and be specific, like to provide better walking and cycling isn't specific enough, if you know what I mean. We want, okay, where is it going to and from? What are you trying to link? What are you got? What destinations are you hitting? What origins? What's your perceived level of service? Do you want everybody, you know, 8 to 80-year-olds on this? And spoiler alert, that's probably what the NTA are going to be asking for. So level of service A, is it you know, that we want it to be deliverable and value for money. And then again, it's all about the options, and the common appraisal framework does state actually if they want 4 options, do nothing or do minimum, and 3 do something. And it also states that a non-infrastructure option should be considered. So this is you know, we've been working a long time. This is the coastal mobility route. Been working a long time on the projects, which used to be called Sandy Cove to Sutton. And yeah, one of the options which was then brought in as a temporary scheme is to reduce the roadway to one way and have the cycle track on the lane that was reallocated. So, you know, and there was about 18 other options outside, all of which trigger huge environmental issues, etc., etc. That's still ongoing, so I'll leave that. But that's just an example of, you know, thinking about all the different options and what could be done. Now, not everything is feasible, we understand, and that can be brought in as well. Then we do want an MCA. It can be a fairly brief exercise for projects under 5 million and a more comprehensive one for 5 to 10. And we've given in the guidance the kind of MCA headings and subheadings that you can use. And this is what it is. You know, it's usually a colored matrix, which helps you decide which option is best. And yeah, we would like a statement on financial affordability. So where are you getting the funding? Is it all from NTA? Is it percentage LIHAF or URDF or whatever? And proposed approach to procurement. That's just, you know, that can be as simple as, you know, we're going to follow the capital works framework, or we're trialing something, so we're doing it this way. We're going out with an expression of interest or something like that. And do write in your project evaluation how you're going to evaluate. So is it, you know, traffic surveys before and after? Is it road user surveys? What does success look like? And especially for the big 10, upwards towards the 10 million mark, we do want to be thinking that way. Just to say, options reports and appraisal examples are available on the SharePoint, the local authority SharePoint. If you're a local authority member, please get in touch with your NTA project manager, and they can get you access to that. And we're hoping to, you know, keep populating these with good examples. And that's me done.
I suppose I'm here to talk about the appraisal element, and you're probably going to feel like some of this is repetition of stuff that you've heard Finola talking about. It's probably stuff you've heard Michael Ahern and Oliver talking about on the first of these. It's definitely stuff that you've heard Robert Kelly talking about as part of his presentation, part of the Active Travel series. But I suppose fundamentally, in starting off with the concept of appraisal, you know, if I was in a room with people that I could see, I'd probably ask the question, who has experience of appraisal? And generally you get a smattering of people putting their hands up. But fundamentally, I suppose the next question I generally ask people is, how many people own a car? And we tend to see a lot more hands going up, probably more than we'd like to see in the current climate of car ownership and that sort of thing. But you know, you then sort of say, well, why do we own a car? And it's probably to get from A to B. And then on that basis, we should all own the same car, and it should be the most economic car, the smallest thing we can buy, the cheapest thing we can buy. But fundamentally, we don't all own the same car. because we all have slightly different requirements. So the objectives that we have and the sub-objectives that we have for owning a car is different. So on that basis, then, what do we end up with? We end up with a list of criteria that we might have. So I have lots of kids, so I need a 7-seater car with 5 doors, room for the dog, those sort of things. Or maybe I do a lot of town driving, I want a small car. So automatically I go on to Done Deal, I put in my criteria, it whittles down the thousands and thousands of cars to a select few that actually meet my requirements. So that is in effect appraisal. So that's what we do. We do it every day of our lives on decisions that we're making, phones, cars, utility bills. We whittle down the options, we look at the things that are important to us, and we head off on that. So appraisal really isn't something that you should be afraid of, and there's no great mystery to it. People think it's all about economics, but it's not really. It's more than that. So there's plenty of guidance on how to do appraisal and what's required as part of the appraisal. So the public spending code is sort of the overarching requirements of everything. The common appraisal framework then sets out the transport specific aspects of appraisal. And then, as Finola has gone through, the project approval guidelines really seeks to align the gateways with the public spending codes and to seek deliverables that build on the public spending code and CAF requirements. So in short, we'd probably say if you're complying with the project approval guidelines, you're probably going to be complying with the requirements of the public spending code and the common appraisal framework. TII obviously have their project appraisal guidelines as well, which give good guidance across some aspects of appraisal as well, and they're a useful resource. So just looking at the public spending code in a little bit more detail and what the purpose of the public spending code is. It was updated in 2019, and the update actually has very little to do with appraisal and much more about managing the projects. And that's really where the project approval guidelines comes in. So the reforms to the public spending code included better project management, improved planning and managing of construction and risks, stronger governance of projects, better assurance of major projects, and increased transparency. So you can see there's actually no mention of appraisal, but appraisal is a key component of it. But actually ensuring value for money incorporates a lot more than just doing a good cost-benefit analysis. And the previous version of the public spending code had this very basic principle, and I think this is really something that I use all the time. And if you come away from this with just one thing in your mind, it's how do we ensure value for money? It's by doing the right thing and then doing it right. So as Finola has mentioned, selecting the right option, are we doing the right thing, is key to doing it. If we don't select the right option, we're never going to get the outcomes that we want. And then when it comes to doing it, are we doing it right? Is our procurement strategy right? Are we managing it right? Those sort of questions are in there because, again, we can often see it's the right project, but then as costs escalate or, as compromises are made during the construction, it ends up not being the right thing to do. So if you come away from this presentation remembering what's the purpose of this appraisal and what am I trying to demonstrate? I'm trying to demonstrate that I'm doing the right thing and that I'm going to do it right. And the appraisal process is there right up to the implementation stage. So appraisal carries all the way through from the start of the project right up to the implementation stage. And appraisal is required across all values of projects, but it's all about proportionality. So the level of appraisal should be proportionate to the value of what we're considering. The department are currently going through a process of updating the common appraisal framework to align it with the public spending code thresholds. They've kindly let me give a quick preview of what those scale of appraisal required would be. And you can see for less than 10 million, we're really looking at simple appraisal, incorporating elements of a preliminary and detailed appraisal. 10 to 20 million, there's the requirement for the strategic assessment report as set out in the public spending code, and detailed appraisal with a multi-criteria analysis. And finally then over 20 million, you're looking at the quantitative types of analysis. So really a simple appraisal less than 10 million is what's being looked at. So what does that actually mean? And I think CAF sort of sets out the process quite well. And you know, it's a very obvious process. It doesn't really have any complexity to it. The elements of preliminary appraisal are really defining the objective, exploring the options, and quantifying the cost and source of funding. And then moving into the more detailed stage, we're looking at the main options, we're analysing them, identifying risks, deciding on a preferred option, and then making a recommendation. So it's a very, very logical process in going through the questions you would ask yourself. So if we talk about preliminary appraisal, effectively the SAR, while the public spending code has various elements in it, it's really looking at this 80 stage. It's before you go in and crack into the appraisal. It's to say, is this a problem worth solving? And if it is, what tools am I going to use to solve it? So you're setting out how you're going to carry out the appraisal. So what are the elements that we should see in any appraisal? The strategic context, the problem definition, objectives, alternatives and options, including a do nothing and a do minimum, costs and sources of funding, constraints, the appraisal of the main options, and then risk analysis. So again, these are things that Finola has mentioned. They're things that were mentioned by Michael and Oliver and Robert in how you develop the project anyway. So if we look at these things, there's nothing here that's not being done anyway. So it's more, the appraisal is more about bringing these together to really demonstrate this is how I'm selecting the right option, and it's bringing in those elements. So your MCA on the technical side might not have brought in all elements that we're considering here, but this is really what the appraisal is setting out. And I suppose today, given sort of the time available to us, I'm really just going to focus on three elements here of problem definition, objectives, and the appraisal of main options. So looking at defining the problem, I suppose quite simply, if we're solving the wrong problem, we're never going to get the right solution. And Oliver mentioned it in his defining the objectives and constraints from the outset. Michael has mentioned the functionality. What's the purpose of the street? What's the transport objective? We need to understand what issue we're trying to solve. So this is one that probably isn't overly relevant to active travel, I might add, but let's look at the M50 for a moment. And what's the capacity of the M50? Well, the capacity of the M50 in AADT terms is 4 lanes per direction, 24 hours a day, 1,900 vehicles by 4, by 2, by 24, 364,800 vehicles a day. We look at our traffic flows. We see currently the heaviest traffic section is at 155,500 vehicles per day. So obviously the M50 operates at less than 50% of capacity. Therefore, there's no problem. I don't have to do anything to solve this problem. This is where, if we are using the wrong information or looking at the thing from the wrong perspective, it's quite clear that we're never going to come up with the solutions that address the problem that we need to solve. So understanding that strategic context and then defining the problem that we need to address is really critical, because there's no point starting out on the project if we don't have a clear understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve. And that naturally leads us to objective setting. So when we're setting the objectives, set them early. You need objectives to be able to undertake your multi-criteria analysis, to be able to whittle down your options. Do those options meet the objectives that you have set? They're clearly linked to the rationale as to why the intervention is required. So your policy context is pretty clear. And, you know, there's plenty of policy out there now in justifying or indicating the need for intervention in inactive modes. And, you know, there's clear policy direction across the national planning framework, across the regional spatial economic strategies, right down through to local area plans, and then even the programme for government and commitments to funding. So there's a clear rationale why it's there, but what you then need to do is bring that down to the specifics of the project that you're trying to deliver. So those objectives should then be SMART. And, you know, you might hear different language around the SMART or the mnemonic SMART, but the public spending code says they should be specific, measurable, attributable, realistic, and time-bound. So it's important then that, as Finola said, we don't just end up with an objective to improve cycling and that's it. You know, we need it to be something that we can then use to whittle down the options. And okay, maybe we can start with a high level objective of improving cycling, but actually we need to develop that a bit further, and that might be done through sub-objectives or criteria. So I just thought I'd throw out a couple of sample objectives. Now, some of these might be good, some of them might be bad, but what I hope you might see is that there's opportunities to see whether they're specific, measurable, attributable, realistic, and time-bound. So for the first one here, provide enhanced connectivity between point A and B for pedestrians and cyclists to encourage increased walking and cycling trips. So if we're trying to measure enhanced connectivity, well, can we do that? Well, probably we can, using things like GIS mapping and accessibility mapping, and seeing what what range of destinations or what catchment is available within a 5-minute, a 10-minute, a 15-minute, and do these interventions increase that catchment between these 2 points and mean that more people have access to good quality walking and cycling, and therefore we can then maybe look at the population and employment statistics around that and say, well, there's now a greater degree of the population who could walk and cycle. The encouragement of them mightn't just be the provision of infrastructure alone, but it's a key component to doing it. So yeah, I can measure those, and I can attribute then any increases to walking and cycling probably to the provision of this infrastructure. Similarly then, okay, we might be looking at safer routes to school or particular issues. Improve safety for pedestrians and cyclists on routes within 1 kilometre of the local primary school. So we're targeting a specific catchment. We're probably saying primary school, not much more than 1 kilometre is really achievable for walking and cycling. But a key component to this is actually improving the safety of it. So the accessibility or connectivity might be okay, but there's a perceived safety problem. And can we measure those things? Again, we can look at what the catchment is. We can see if we improve that catchment. We can see then how do we improve the safety? Is it through segregated facilities or non-segregated facilities? And safety can sometimes be something that's difficult to measure because it can be a bit reactive. You're measuring incidents or collisions and trying to see, is there change in that? But when it comes to walking and cycling modes, it's far more about the hazard, the near misses. And we know so many of these things go underreported that really it's more so saying we know that a segregated infrastructure is safer than a non-segregated piece of infrastructure. And similarly that that results in better safety outcomes, and it also reduces that barrier that people might have. You know, I won't go through all of these in detail, but reducing reliance on car trips by providing sustainable alternatives for trips within a 5-kilometre catchment. That might be similar to the first one above there. But again, you're looking at, we're not trying to solve the whole transport problem. We're trying to look at it in an area that can actually accommodate walking, cycling trips. What's an appropriate distance, and that might be tied into the last one there, improving accessibility to public transport by walking and cycling. Again, I want to get people to the public transport. I'm not looking for them to make their whole trip by walking and cycling modes. I want to get them to the public transport, and maybe that 2-kilometre, 5-kilometre catchment, looking at, well, what walking and cycling infrastructure does that? So that's, I'm reducing the reliance on car by creating the opportunity for those multimodal trips across those things. And then you couldn't do anything without talking about contributing to the achievement of climate action targets by catering for increased travel by walking and cycling. Again, the attribution of some of these things can be difficult, but you know, there are clear targets set out there for reductions in emissions, and we have potential to measure the contribution of these in achieving these. So sometimes the measures that we're looking at are very specific towards climate action. Other times they're more specific at addressing safety or other enhanced connectivity or those sort of things. So it's about making sure they're right, and maybe it's a combination of all of these that form your sub-objectives and criteria. So then finally onto the main appraisal tool. So really there's two elements to every appraisal. There's a financial appraisal and an economic appraisal. So the financial appraisal, people tend to say, oh, I don't know what financial appraisal is, and it's not relevant to the projects that we're looking at because there's no revenue. And okay, that's fair enough. But really what we want to understand as part of financial appraisal is what's the cash flow? What's the cash in? What's the cash out? And we don't always see that through economic appraisal, but we see it the financial appraisal. What's the cash in? What's cash out over time? In most cases, some of the smaller projects are probably only going to have an outlay over a year or 2 years, and therefore it's not a huge thing. But if you were looking at options, let's say there was an option that required a swing opening bridge across a river, and there's another option that can make use of an existing bridge, there could be ongoing maintenance costs over the lifetime of that project that would actually have a cost far beyond the initial upfront capital cost. And that may be something that you would take into account, and that would deem it financially not as good as the other options that are being looked at. But financial appraisal is required on all projects. But if you're estimating your costs, then it's just really a matter of profiling your costs over the term of the project. And that's the start. That's really the start and end of financial appraisal. It does feed into that affordability assessment, but we do know that there's significant funding available for these type of projects, and affordability shouldn't be a constraint unless we're looking at very, very expensive projects that mean we can't do other projects at the expense of doing this project. And then economic appraisal. So it's important then to identify that the Common Appraisal Framework details both multi-criteria analysis and the quantitative cost-benefit analysis or cost-effectiveness analysis as economic appraisal. So again, we don't need to be going into detailed cost-benefit analysis on the majority of projects that we're looking at. It's only projects that are over 20 million euro that require the cost-benefit analysis. So on that basis, the majority of projects that we'll be considering under the active mode are really requiring a multi-criteria analysis. And as Finola has outlined, the multi-criteria analysis is forming part of the option selection process in most cases. So therefore, it's really about building that up as part of the ongoing process and using that in bringing the appraisal together. And there's plenty of guidance on multi-criteria analysis, but I suppose the key thing is, firstly, that it's an objective-based assessment tool. So you're measuring the achievement of the options that you have against the objectives that you have set, and you're comparing them then to see which one's points, which one meets the objectives to the best degree. Common Appraisal Framework does suggest the use of weights that can be used, and some of the other guidance would give that. In general, on NTA projects, the weighting we apply is that all criteria are equal, and that's an approach that we have found is most suited to ensuring that case making doesn't become an issue. So if we want a particular option to come forward, well, then we put a very high weighting on cost, or we put a very high weighting on safety, or we put a very high weighting on integration, and that brings one option ahead of another option, which can really lead us to the issue of case making. So unless there's a really, really good reason to move away from the same weighting applied across all criteria, we wouldn't be considering that weighting should be applied. So in terms of multi-criteria analysis, to quote Bill Clinton, he said it's the economy stupid, but in reality, it's not just the economy stupid. But particularly on walking and cycling modes, when we look at cost-benefit analysis, the typical approaches of value of time and journey time saving really don't apply in the context of these type of projects. And we're looking at far more qualitative, in some cases, assessment criteria and the context of journey time saving and cost benefit analysis isn't the most important thing. So as Finola outlined, the Common Appraisal Framework sets out objectives or criteria across economy, safety, environment, accessibility and social inclusion, integration and physical activity. I think all of these are reasonably self-explanatory in terms of what they're doing. Maybe it's worth focusing on accessibility and social inclusion. That's looking at accessibility in both forms, I suppose, that connectivity concept of accessibility, but it's also accessibility to services and employment opportunities. And it's also then that concept of accessible, so mobility impaired, visual impaired, that type of accessibility. Similarly, then social inclusion is really looking at access to opportunities, areas of deprivation, social economic impacts of those things. How does it support the delivery of other policy areas in those criteria? And similarly then integration has two parts really. There's the transport integration piece. So how does this fit in with transport policy? But then there's the integration with wider government policy. So whether that's the Common Climate Action Plan, or whether that's the housing plan, or whether it's the social inclusion plan. So that integration piece. So I think as a starting point, what I would generally look to do on anything is when I have my objectives set, I would then look to see how can I categorize them under these criteria, and then can I quantify them? If I can't quantify them, I'll have to address them qualitatively. If I can quantify them, is there a mechanism for monetizing them? And if there is a mechanism for monetizing them, well, then I should try and use that mechanism for monetizing them. But in the first instance, the MCA should, where possible, seek to quantify. And if it can't quantify, it should be qualitative. So that would be how I would generally approach these things, that list out the costs and benefits, see, can I quantify how I'm measuring my achievement of the objectives? And if I can quantify it, use that. So as I say, GIS tools, measuring the increase in catchment, measuring the number of jobs or the number of population that are now within a certain catchment area. That's a good way of quantitatively measuring the achievement of the objective without monetizing it, without sort of saying there's a journey time benefit or there's a health benefit relating to physical activity or those sort of things. Because sometimes those things aren't really going to necessarily offer any great insight into the decision-making process. So really, just to finish up then, the key takeaways that I'd say is, everyone has done appraisal. It's just about then applying that logic of appraisal to the projects that you're working on. It's important to realize that all spending, all projects, all public money requires appraisal. It's not just the big ones, but that level of appraisal is proportionate to the spend. So we don't expect you to be doing mountains of cost benefit analysis for a project that's €500,000. That's not what it is. So that level, that proportionality is key. It's important to flag that appraisal is really part of the decision process. And as I said, you'll see how it's built up through the evolution of the project, the life cycle of the project. It's not something that you do at the end to support the decision that you've made. So it evolves through the project along with the design, along with the option selection process. And then, when you come to doing this stuff, there's plenty of guidance out there to support the development of these appraisals. So, do make use of it. But there's people more than happy to take questions on things and give guidance. There's, it may be the first time you're doing an appraisal, but it's not the first time someone else is doing it. So make use of that support network as well that's out there. And that's really it. I'll just remind you of the thing. If you come away with one thing from the presentation, it's doing the right thing and then doing it right. If you apply that concept to the approach of your projects, you will pretty much be demonstrating and delivering projects that are value for money. That's it from me. Oliver, thank you.